I bought my first new car last September, and it felt like a real milestone for me. I'd been driving the same beat-up Honda Civic since college, and finally getting something nice was something I'd worked toward for years. It was a newer model Camry. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and it was new, and I really didn't want anything to happen to it. I live in Seattle in this older apartment building in Capitol Hill, and the street parking situation is absolutely terrible. There's never any spots, and when you do find one, it's usually blocks away. I was already paranoid about someone hitting my car or breaking into it, since that happened to my old Civic twice. My coworker Mike told me about how some of the downtown condo buildings rent out their extra parking spots to non-residents, and I looked into it because my office is right downtown anyway. I could park there after work and just walk to my apartment, which was only like 15 minutes away, and my car would be safe in a secure garage instead of on the street. The building I found was one of those newer luxury towers off 2nd Avenue, and they had a spot available on level 3 for $300 a month, which is ridiculous, but not that much more than I'd been paying in parking tickets, and the peace of mind seemed worth it. They gave me a key card and assigned me spot number 237, and the whole thing felt very official. I had to sign a contract and everything. The garage was 4 levels underground with keycard access only, and that made me feel good about the security situation. The first couple weeks were great. I'd finish work around 5:30 or 6, drive over to the garage, scan my card at the entrance gate, and park in my spot, which was in this corner section near some concrete support pillars. Then I'd take the elevator up to street level and walk home. The garage itself was pretty typical for an underground parking structure. Fluorescent lights overhead, though some were burned out, so certain areas were darker than others. Lots of concrete pillars that blocked your view of other sections, and the cell service down there was terrible, being that far underground. I started noticing the car next to mine probably in my second week. It was parked in spot 238, which was directly to the right of my spot, and it was this older sedan, maybe a mid-2000s Accord, dark blue with pretty heavily tinted windows. The thing that stood out was that it was always there when I arrived. At first, this didn't seem that weird because obviously other people parked there too, and maybe they just got home before me. But then I started to realize it was there every single time I pulled in. And I mean every single time, even on days when I left work early or stayed late. The car was already parked next to mine. I'd pull into my spot and glance over, and there it would be, and I never saw anyone getting in or out of it. The other thing I noticed was that after I'd get out of my car and grab my bag and lock it up and start walking toward the elevator, I'd hear a car door close behind me. Not immediately, but like 30 seconds after I'd started walking, and then I'd hear footsteps walking in the same direction, but they'd always go to the stairwell instead of the elevator. I only turned around to look once, and I saw someone in a dark jacket walking away from the area where my car was, but they were already pretty far, and the lighting wasn't great, so I couldn't make out any details. At the time, I figured it was someone who lived in the building and preferred taking the stairs, which seemed weird since we were 3 levels underground, but I didn't think too much about it. This went on for probably a week before it started to feel off. I'm not someone who usually notices patterns, but it was just too consistent. The car was always there before me, and someone always got out right after I did. The timing felt too precise to be a coincidence. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, especially since nothing bad had actually happened, but something about it bothered me. I decided to test it one day by leaving work super early, like 3 in the afternoon. I got to the garage at 3:30 expecting the spot next to mine to be empty, but when I pulled in, the car was already there. Same dark sedan, same tinted windows, parked perfectly within the lines of spot 238. That really got to me, because there's no way someone just happens to be home in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, right when I randomly decided to leave early. I sat in my car for a minute trying to decide what to do, and I looked over at the sedan, but I couldn't see anything through those tinted windows, and I had this sudden thought that maybe someone was sitting in there, watching me. I got out and grabbed my stuff and locked my car and started walking to the elevator, moving faster than usual. Sure enough, about 20 seconds later, I heard a car door close behind me. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking and hit the elevator button and waited there, and I heard the stairwell door open and close, but I still didn't look. Over the next few days, I tried arriving at different times. I came at 8 p.m. one night, after getting drinks with friends. The car was there. I came at 5 p.m. the next day. The car was there. I came at 9:30 p.m. after a movie. The car was there. Every single time the sedan was already parked in spot 238 before I arrived, no matter what time I showed up, and every single time I'd hear that car door close 20 or 30 seconds after I got out of mine. I started really dreading going to the garage, which is insane, because I was paying $300 a month for a safe place to park. The breakthrough came when I was talking to Mike about it at work. He'd recommended the building to me, so I figured maybe he'd know something about the parking situation there. But when I described what was happening, his face got really weird, and he told me he'd never actually parked there himself. He'd just heard about it from someone else. And then he asked which spot number I had, and when I told him 237, he got quiet for a second. Like really quiet. And then said he thought he'd heard something about that spot before. Something about a previous renter having issues, but he couldn't remember the details. That night, I decided to stay late in the garage after parking. I wanted to see if the person in the sedan would eventually leave, or if they'd just sit there, waiting. I parked in my spot like normal, and the sedan was already there like always, and I got out and locked my car, but instead of walking to the elevator, I went back to the entrance ramp and waited around the corner where I could see spot 238, but whoever was in the car wouldn't be able to see me. I waited for almost 45 minutes and nothing happened. The sedan just sat there with its tinted windows, and I couldn't tell if someone was inside or not. My phone barely worked down there, so I couldn't even browse to pass the time. I just stood there in this dark corner of the garage, watching. Finally, I gave up and started walking back toward the elevator, and the second I stepped into view, I heard the car door open. I spun around. The door of the sedan was open, but I still couldn't see who was getting out because of the angle and the pillars blocking my view. And then I heard the stairwell door close. The next day, I ordered a dash cam online, one of those ones that runs continuously when the car is parked and has motion detection. It took a few days to arrive and another day for me to figure out how to install it properly. But once I had it set up, I felt better about at least having some kind of evidence of what was happening. The first couple days the camera didn't catch much, just me arriving and leaving. But on the third day, I checked the footage and saw something that made my hands shake. The video showed my car sitting in spot 237 for about 2 hours after I'd left for the day. And then the door of the sedan in spot 238 opened. Someone got out. They were wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap, and they walked directly over to my car and stood next to the driver's side door for almost 3 full minutes. Just standing there, looking at it. They didn't try to open it or anything. They just stood there. And then they walked around to the back of my car and did the same thing. Just standing there, staring at it. After maybe 5 minutes total, they got back in the sedan, and the video didn't show anything else until I returned that evening. I took my laptop to the police station the next morning and showed them the footage. The officer I spoke with watched it and agreed it was weird, but said since the person hadn't actually damaged my car or threatened me, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I report it to building management and maybe request a different parking spot. He also said I should keep recording, and if the person ever made contact or did anything more aggressive to come back and file a formal report. I didn't go back to the garage after that. I just stopped parking there completely and went back to street parking near my apartment. My roommate thought I was overreacting, but I didn't care. Something about that footage really disturbed me. The way the person just stood there next to my car for that long. It felt wrong. 2 days after I stopped using the spot, I found something tucked under my apartment building's front door when I got home from work. It was a regular white envelope with no address or stamp, just my first name written on the front in pen. Inside was a printed photograph of my Camry parked in spot 237. The photo was taken from inside another vehicle. You could see part of the dashboard and windshield frame in the shot, and based on the angle it was clearly taken from spot 238, from inside that sedan. But what made me feel sick was what was written on the back of the photo in the same handwriting as my name on the envelope. It was a date and time, September 18th at 6:14 p.m. I had to check my calendar to confirm, but that was my very first day parking there. The first time I'd ever driven into that garage. They'd been waiting for me from the beginning. They'd taken this photo on day 1. I moved out of my apartment 3 weeks later. I didn't tell my roommate the real reason. I just said I wanted to live closer to work. I never went back to that garage, and I sold the Camry 6 months after that because every time I got in it, I thought about that photograph. The building management never contacted me about anything, and when I called them to cancel my contract, they barely seemed to care. They just processed the cancellation, and that was it. The photo is still in my desk drawer. I don't know why I kept it, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. I can see part of that sedan's dashboard in the shot where someone sat for all those hours. What were they waiting for? What was supposed to happen that never did because I stopped going there. The date on the back is fading now, but I can still read it. My very first day when I thought I was just parking my car, and someone was already there next to me taking that picture. I was driving back from a wedding in Central Oregon about 10 years ago. It was one of those long drives where you leave right after the reception ends, so you can get home at a decent hour instead of paying for a hotel. I had about 3 hours left when my car started making this clicking sound from under the hood. At first I thought maybe I had run over something on the highway and it was just debris stuck somewhere, but then the temperature gauge started climbing, and I knew that wasn't good. I pulled over on the shoulder and popped the hood, even though I don't know much about cars. I figured maybe I could see something obvious like a loose belt or something. But everything just looked like an engine looks to me, hot and greasy and complicated. It was around 7:30, so the sun was getting low, and that stretch of Highway 26 doesn't have much on it. Just farmland and the occasional house set way back from the road with long gravel driveways. I called my roadside assistance, and the guy told me it would be about 90 minutes before they could get a truck out to me, which was annoying, but not surprising, given where I was. He said there was a town called Ridgemont, about 15 miles west, and they'd have the truck meet me there if I could get the car that far. I tried starting it again, but the temperature gauge shot right back up, so I turned it off and resigned myself to waiting. I had been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes, scrolling through my phone even though I only had 2 bars of service, when I saw headlights coming up from behind me. A blue pickup truck slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder in front of my car, and I felt that automatic tension you get when you're a woman alone and a stranger stops. I stayed in my car with the doors locked and watched as a man got out and walked back toward me. He was probably in his late 50s, clean cut, polo shirt tucked into jeans and work boots. He knocked on my window and I rolled it down about 3 inches. He asked if I needed help, and I explained about the engine overheating and that I had roadside assistance coming, but it would be a while. He nodded and said he lived about 10 miles up the road and had seen me sitting there on his way back from the hardware store. He offered to give me a ride into Ridgemont, so I wouldn't have to wait on the side of the highway in the dark and could meet the tow truck there instead. I hesitated. Miner's because obviously you don't just get into cars with strangers, but he had this dad energy about him. Like he reminded me of my friend Sarah's father, who's always helping people with car trouble. And he mentioned that his daughter was at Oregon State, and he'd want someone to help her if she broke down. And that detail made him seem safer somehow, like he was thinking of me as someone's daughter too. I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat and locked up my car and got into his truck. The inside was clean but lived in minors. There was a coffee tumbler in the cup holder and a John Grisham audiobook case on the dashboard. He had one of those air fresheners that smells like new car scent, and the radio was on low playing classic rock. He introduced himself as Dennis and asked where I was coming from. So I told him about the wedding, and we made small talk about how weddings are always either too long or too short, and about the drive through Central Oregon, which he said he'd done 1,000 times for work. He didn't specify what work, and I didn't ask. We drove for maybe 10 minutes, and the conversation was easy enough. He asked if I was from Portland, and I said yes, and he said his daughter was studying environmental science and loved it out there in Corvallis, which is about an hour south of Portland, and I said that was great and meant it. The whole interaction felt normal, and I was actually relieved to not be sitting in my car in the growing dark, waiting for the tow truck. I was thinking about how I'd have a funny story to tell about my car breaking down and getting rescued by a nice guy who reminded me of a guidance counselor or something. Then we passed a green highway sign that said Ridgemont 5 miles with an arrow pointing to an exit coming up on the right, and I didn't think much of it at first, but then we passed the exit and kept going straight. I looked over at Dennis and said, "Wasn't that the exit to Ridgemont?" And he said, "Oh, traffic's better if we take Route 40 and loop back around. It's actually faster, even though it seems longer." And I said, "Okay," because I didn't know the area, and maybe he was right. But something about the way he said it felt off. Like he had the answer ready. I started paying more attention after that. We were heading deeper into farm country, and the houses were getting farther apart, and the sky was almost dark now. Just that deep blue before it goes black. I tested the door lock button on my side panel, pressing it down. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. And I felt my stomach drop a little. I tried to do it casually like I was just fidgeting. But when I glanced over, I saw Dennis's eyes flick down to where my hand was on the door panel, and then back to the road. I said something about it being a nice truck, and he said thanks. He'd had it for about 8 years, and it was reliable. And then he said it has this safety feature where only the driver can control the locks, so his granddaughter can't accidentally open the door while they're driving. And I said, oh, that makes sense. But my brain caught on the word granddaughter, because earlier he'd said daughter. And maybe he misspoke, or maybe he has both a daughter and a granddaughter. But the way he said it, so smooth and explanatory, made me feel like he was testing whether I'd notice. We kept driving, and I was trying to figure out if I was overreacting or if something was actually wrong. I looked in the back seat for the first time and saw a child's car seat, one of those booster seats for kids, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And that didn't make sense with a granddaughter, unless she was very young. But then why would she be at Oregon State studying environmental science? None of it added up. But I also didn't want to accuse this guy of anything, when maybe I was just tired and paranoid from being stranded. Then Dennis said, "We need to talk about what you saw at the rest stop." And his voice was different. Not friendly dad voice anymore. Flat, serious. And I said, "What rest stop?" "I haven't been to a rest stop." And he said, "Don't play games with me. You know what I'm talking about." And I said, "I really don't. I'm coming from a wedding in Sisters. I haven't stopped anywhere except to get gas this morning." And he was quiet for a second. And then he looked at me. Really looked at me while driving. And I saw confusion cross his face. And then something else. Maybe anger. Or frustration. I realized he thought I was someone else. Someone who had seen something at a rest stop. And my first thought was relief. Like, okay, this is just a misunderstanding. But then my second thought was, if he's looking for someone who saw something bad enough that he's willing to intercept them on a highway, then I'm in a truck with someone dangerous, and he's just figured out I'm not who he thought I was. Which might make things better, or might make things worse. I said, "I think you have me confused with someone else. I've never seen you before today." And he didn't say anything for a long moment, just kept driving. And I could see his jaw working like he was thinking. And I was thinking too. Trying to figure out what to do. I didn't have my phone in my hand. It was in my bag in the back seat. And even if I could get to it, we were in the middle of nowhere and help was at least 15 or 20 minutes away. And the door locks didn't work from my side. My mind was going through options. And I remembered this self-defense class I took in college, where the instructor said if you're ever in a car with someone and you can't get out, you need to make them stop the car any way you can. And the best way is to make yourself a problem. So I started making these gagging sounds, like I was going to throw up. And Dennis looked over at me and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I think I'm car sick. I need you to pull over right now. I'm going to be sick." He said, "We're almost there. Just hold on." And I made a louder gagging sound and put my hand over my mouth. And he said, "Jesus Christ, not in my truck." And he started slowing down and pulled onto the shoulder. And the second the truck stopped, I opened my door. It opened fine from the inside when the truck wasn't moving. And I stumbled out and walked a few feet away, bent over with my hands on my knees like I was going to vomit. And I could hear him behind me saying, "Are you okay?" And I looked back, and he was standing by the driver's door, watching me. There was a cornfield right there. The stalks were tall. It must have been late in the season, right before harvest. And I made a decision. I stood up and ran, straight into the corn. I heard him yell, "Hey," and then I heard his boots on the asphalt, and then on the dirt at the edge of the field. But I was already deep in the rows. The stalks were taller than me, and I stayed low and moved as fast as I could without making too much noise. I could hear him crashing through behind me, yelling for me to stop, that he just wanted to talk. But I kept going. I didn't run in a straight line. I zigzagged, and then I dropped down and crawled, because I remembered reading somewhere that if someone's chasing you in a field, you should go low and change direction so they can't track your movement. I could hear him for a while, miners moving through the corn, and then I couldn't hear him anymore. Just the sound of the stalks rustling in the wind, and my own breathing. I stayed down for what felt like forever. My knees were getting cut up on the broken stalks on the ground, and my hands were dirty, and I was shaking. Eventually, I started moving again. Staying low. Heading toward where I thought I'd seen lights from a house before, we pulled over. It took a long time crawling through that field, and I kept expecting to hear him near me, but I never did. When I finally reached the other edge of the cornfield, I came out onto a different road, a smaller one, and I could see a farmhouse about a quarter-mile down with lights on. I ran along the road ditch, staying low, until I got close to the house, and then I saw headlights coming toward me, and I panicked and almost dove back into the field. But then I saw it was a farm truck, an old Ford with rust on the sides. I stepped into the road and waved my arms, and the truck stopped, and an older man rolled down his window. and I must have looked insane, minus dirty and crying. And I told him I needed help, that someone had tried to hurt me, and could he please call the police? And he let me get in his truck, and he called 911 on his cell phone. And we waited there with his doors locked until the police came. The police took my statement and went looking for Dennis and his blue pickup, but they never found him. They went back to where my car was, and it started up fine. The engine was cool, and the temperature gauge was normal, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. They checked my phone, and my call log showed that I had called a number that afternoon around 7. But it wasn't my roadside assistance. It was a number with a local area code that when the police called it just rang and no one answered. I don't remember calling that number. I remember calling roadside assistance, but maybe I didn't. Maybe I called the wrong number. Or maybe someone pathic, I don't know. The police asked if I'd gotten a good look at Dennis, and I described him, but it was generic. Middle-aged white guy, clean-cut, polo shirt, and they said they'd check into it. But I got the sense they thought maybe I'd overreacted, or maybe I'd accepted a ride from someone I knew, and it went bad, and I was changing the story. They were polite about it, but I could tell, and I couldn't really blame them, because what evidence was there? Just my word, and a car that worked fine, and a phone call I didn't remember making. I think about it sometimes more than I should, about what he meant about the rest stop, about what someone saw, or what he thought they saw, and whether I looked like someone, or whether my car breaking down right there was a coincidence. Or if it wasn't a coincidence, then how did he make my car overheat, and how did he know I'd be on that road at that time? And the biggest question is mine. Was he looking for someone specific who saw something they shouldn't have? Or was it random, and I just happened to be there? I still drive that highway sometimes when I visit friends in Central Oregon, and I always make sure my car is in perfect condition before I go, and I don't stop for anything. And I've never seen a blue pickup truck with a child's car seat in the back. But I also don't know if I'd recognize it if I did, because I didn't get his license plate number, and I barely looked at the truck. I was too busy trying not to panic. And sometimes I wonder if the woman he was actually looking for ever got found, or if she's still out there, or if she saw this story somewhere and recognized it and knew what he was talking about. Because I still don't. I need to start this by saying that I'm a 23-year-old college student, and up until about 6 months ago, I thought working retail was just boring, occasionally annoying. I never thought it could actually be dangerous. Looking back now, I realize how many red flags I ignored simply because I didn't want to seem paranoid or rude. This all started around October of last year. I was in my senior year at the state university, taking a full load of classes and working 3 evening shifts per week at a grocery store, about 15 minutes from campus. It's one of those mid-sized chain stores in a strip mall. Nothing fancy. The job was exactly what you'd expect, scanning items, making small talk, dealing with the occasional expired coupon drama. I usually worked Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., which was perfect because it didn't interfere with my morning classes. The store was always pretty busy during my shifts since people stopped by after work, so there was a steady flow of customers. I'd gotten used to seeing some of the same faces regularly. The after-work crowd grabbing quick dinners, the elderly couples who shop together, the parents with screaming kids. You start to recognize people after a while, even if you don't know their names. I first noticed him sometime in early November. He was probably in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Average height. Always wore business casual clothes, like he'd just come from an office job. Khakis, button-down shirts, that sort of thing. The first few times he came through my lane, I didn't think anything of it. He was polite, made normal small talk about the weather, always paid with a credit card, completely unremarkable. But then I started to notice a pattern. Even when my lane had a line and the other registers were completely empty, he'd wait for mine. I remember one Thursday evening when there were literally 2 people ahead of him in my line in register 3. Had nobody at all. The cashier at 3 even called out, "I can help whoever's next," but he stayed put, stayed in my line. At the time, I thought maybe he just didn't hear her, or didn't want to seem rude by switching lanes. I'm a relatively friendly person, especially at work where I have to be, so I'd chat with customers to make the time go by faster. With him, the conversation started off normal enough. He'd comment on items he was buying, ask how my day was going, that sort of thing. I'd respond the way I respond to everyone. Polite, upbeat, professional. My name tag says Morgan on it. So after a few visits, he started using my name. Thanks, Morgan. Or, how's your evening going, Morgan? Again, nothing that seemed weird in the moment. It was probably mid-November when things started to shift, though I didn't recognize it as shifting at the time. He came through my line on a Thursday evening with just a few items. I remember it was a frozen pizza, some beer, and a bag of chips. As I was scanning his stuff, he said something like, "I really like that color on you. Is that what they call mint green?" He was talking about my nail polish. I'd just gotten my nails done that weekend, and I remember being kind of surprised that a middle-aged guy would notice or comment on nail polish. But I also thought maybe he had daughters or something, so I thanked him and mentioned I'd just gotten them done. The next conversation that stands out was maybe a week or two later. He asked if I went to the university in town. At the time, this seemed like a reasonable question since there are probably 5 or 6 colleges within a 20-mile radius, and lots of students work retail. I told him yes, that I was a senior. He asked what I was studying, and I said communications with a focus on public relations. I remember he said something about how that was a smart field to go into. Very practical. The whole interaction felt normal, like standard customer chit-chat. But then there was the coffee shop comment. This one made me pause, but I still rationalized it away. He came through my line on a Saturday evening, and while I was bagging his groceries, he said, "I think I saw you at the Brew Point Cafe last week. Do you study there sometimes?" The Brew Point is a coffee shop about halfway between campus and the store where I worked. I did go there sometimes to study between class and work, usually on Tuesdays. I said something like, "Oh yeah, I go there sometimes," trying to keep it vague. He said he worked nearby and grabbed coffee there during his lunch break occasionally. Here's the thing, and I feel stupid admitting this now. Each of these conversations in isolation seemed completely harmless. Retail workers make small talk with regulars all the time. People comment on nail polish. People ask about school. People mention seeing you around town. None of it felt threatening in the moment, because he was always smiling, always polite, never said anything that was explicitly inappropriate. And I was at work, in a public place, surrounded by coworkers and other customers. It felt safe. I did mention him to a few of my coworkers, but more in a joking way. I'd say stuff like, "There's my regular again," or "This guy always picks my line even when it's the longest." One of my coworkers, Jessica, who worked the service desk, would tease me about having an admirer. I'd laugh it off. At that point, I genuinely thought it was just a coincidence that he came through my lane, or maybe he thought I was the fastest cashier or something. December came around, and the store got increasingly busy with the holiday shopping rush. My shifts were more hectic, and I honestly didn't have as much time to think about individual customers. But he was still there, still choosing my lane, still making conversation. One time he asked what my plans were for winter break, and I mentioned I was staying in town to work and catch up on my thesis. Another time he asked if I was applying to grad schools or going straight into the workforce. These felt like the kinds of questions adults ask college students, not threatening, just expressing interest. The moment that really made me start to feel uneasy happened in early January, right after I came back from the short winter break. It was a Thursday evening, maybe around 7 p.m. Jessica from the service desk came up to me during a lull and said, "Hey, your regular is here." I looked confused because there was no one in my line at that moment. She said no, like he's here. I saw him sitting in his car in the parking lot when I went out for my break like 20 minutes ago. Then he came inside right around the time your shift started. That's when something clicked in my brain. I realized that he always seemed to come in during my shifts, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings. I'd never seen him in the store on the days I wasn't working, even though I'd sometimes stop by on my days off to grab something. Jessica's comment made me realize he might be timing his visits, specifically to when I was there. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he just did his shopping after work, and his schedule happened to line up with mine. Maybe he worked nearby, and this was the most convenient time for him to stop by. There were plenty of logical explanations, but something about knowing he'd been sitting in the parking lot, waiting for my shift to start, made my stomach feel weird. That evening, he came through my line around 8 p.m. The conversation was similar to usual. He asked how my break was. I said it was fine. He mentioned the weather was supposed to get cold again. Nothing out of the ordinary. But I found myself being less chatty than usual, giving shorter responses. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. My shift ended at 10 p.m. as usual. I clocked out, grabbed my coat and bag from the break room, and headed out the side employee entrance that led to the parking lot. The parking lot was pretty empty at that time of night, since most customers cleared out by 9:30 or so. My car was parked in the employee section, which was off to the side of the main lot, kind of separate from where customers typically parked. As I was walking toward my car, I noticed a vehicle parked a few spaces down from mine. A dark blue sedan. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes people sit in their cars to make phone calls or whatever. But as I got closer to my own car, I realized it was him. The regular customer, sitting in his car. And I'm pretty sure he was watching the employee entrance. When he saw me looking in his direction, he got out of his car. He waved, started walking toward me, called out, "Hey Morgan!" My keys were already in my hand, and I remember my fingers tightening around them. He was maybe 15 feet away when he said something like, "I saw you coming out and wanted to say hi. I didn't want to bother you at your register since you seemed busy tonight." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me that something was wrong. We were in a parking lot, maybe 3 other cars. It was dark. The employee entrance was behind me, and this man who'd been coming through my checkout line for months was approaching me. All I could think was, he knew when my shift ended. He'd waited in the parking lot for me to come out. This wasn't a coincidence. I did something that I think saved me from whatever might have happened. Instead of continuing toward my car, I turned around, walked straight back to the employee entrance. I said something like, "Oh, I forgot something inside," trying to keep my voice normal. I didn't run, didn't want to escalate anything. But I walked quickly. I heard him say, "Oh, okay," behind me. But I didn't turn around. I yanked open the employee door and went directly to the front of the store where my manager, Keith, was closing out one of the registers. I told Keith what happened. I explained about the customer who always came through my line, about Jessica seeing him wait in the parking lot, about him just now being parked near my car when I tried to leave. To Keith's credit, he took me seriously immediately. He said, "Okay, don't go out there alone, let me walk you to your car." Keith walked me back out to the parking lot. The blue sedan was still there, but the man was sitting in his car again. Not outside of it. Keith stood next to my car while I got in, started it, and backed out. He waited until I pulled out of the parking lot before heading back inside. I didn't drive straight home. I took a completely different route, one that added about 10 minutes to my commute, just to make sure no one was following me. I kept checking my rearview mirror the entire drive. When I got home, I sat in my car in my apartment complex parking lot for probably 5 minutes, just watching, making sure the blue sedan didn't pull in behind me. It didn't. I went inside, locked my door, and honestly felt like an idiot. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. Maybe he really did just want to say hi. Maybe I'd misread the situation. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something bad almost happened. The next day I called the store and asked to speak to Keith. I told him I didn't feel comfortable working my Saturday shift if there was a chance that customer would show up. I asked if he could either switch me to a different schedule or make sure I wasn't working alone at closing time. Keith said he'd look into it and told me not to worry. Later that afternoon, Keith called me back. He said he'd pulled the security camera footage from the parking lot and from inside the store over the past few weeks. He said what he found concerned him. Apparently the man had been photographing me through the front windows of the store. With his phone, Keith said the footage showed him standing outside the store on multiple occasions. Phone pointed toward my register. There was also footage of him following me with his eyes whenever I moved around the store, like when I'd walk to the service desk or go help bag groceries at another register. Keith told me he was banning the man from the store permanently and that he'd filed a report with the police in case I wanted to pursue it further. He also changed my schedule so I'd be working different days and earlier hours, and he made sure there were always multiple people scheduled during my shifts. I felt relieved but also kind of shaky, hearing about the photographs. What was he planning to do with those? I did end up filing a police report, mostly on Keith's recommendation. The officer I spoke with was professional, but made it clear that since the man hadn't actually done anything illegal, photographing someone in public isn't a crime. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do except document it. He took down the information, got the license plate number from the security footage Keith provided, and said he'd follow up if anything else happened. Nothing else did happen. At least not directly. The man never came back to the store. I never saw the blue sedan in the parking lot again. I switched to the new schedule Keith gave me. Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. and finished out the semester without incident. I graduated in May and moved to a different city for a job. I thought the whole thing was over, but about a month after I moved, something weird happened that still makes me feel uneasy. I got a notification from Google Photos that my storage was almost full. When I went to check what was taking up space, I found a bunch of screenshots of my social media profiles that I definitely didn't take. My Instagram, my Facebook, even my LinkedIn. The metadata showed they were saved in late January, right around the time all of this was happening. The thing is, I have no idea who took those screenshots. My Google Photos is linked to my phone and my laptop, and both of those were always with me. I never left them unattended at work or anywhere else. The only explanation I can think of is that someone accessed my account remotely, but I had two-factor authentication turned on, and I never got any alerts about suspicious login attempts. When I mentioned it to the police in a follow-up call, they said they couldn't prove who did it or how, and since nothing was done with the screenshots, they weren't posted anywhere or shared, there wasn't really a case to pursue. Here's what I still don't understand. The detective who followed up on my report told me they'd identified the man from his license plate. He lived about 45 minutes away from the grocery store where I worked. There were at least 5 other locations of the same grocery chain that were closer to where he lived. Some were significantly closer. So why did he drive all the way to that specific store? How did he even know I worked there? How did he first notice me? The detective also mentioned that the man had no prior criminal record, at least nothing that showed up in their system. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm, had lived in the same house for 15 years, no history of stalking or harassment charges. On paper, he was completely ordinary, which somehow makes it worse, because it means I had no way of knowing he was potentially dangerous. I still think about this more than I'd like to admit. I think about how many times I was friendly to him, because that's what you're supposed to do in customer service. I think about how I'd rationalized every single red flag. The nail polish comment, the coffee shop sighting, the fact that he always chose my lane because I didn't want to assume the worst about someone who was being polite. I think about what might have happened if I'd walked to my car that night instead of going back inside. Sometimes I wonder if he's doing the same thing to someone else now. If there's another college student working at a grocery store somewhere, being friendly because it's their job, not realizing that someone's memorizing their schedule and taking photographs through the window. I reported it. The store banned him. But there's nothing stopping him from just going to a different store and starting over. The worst part is that I'll probably never know what he was planning. Was he just a lonely guy with poor social skills who didn't realize he was being creepy? Or was there something darker going on? The photographs suggest it wasn't innocent, but I don't know what he intended to do with them. I don't know why he chose me specifically. Out of all the cashiers at all the grocery stores in the area, I still work retail at my new job, but I'm a lot more cautious now. I don't wear a name tag anymore. I convinced my manager to let me use a badge with just my first initial on it. I vary my schedule when I can. I'm less friendly with customers who try to make personal conversation, and I always check the parking lot before I leave at the end of my shift. I don't know if that makes me safer or just more paranoid. But after what happened, I figure it's better to be paranoid than to ignore red flags until it's too late. I've been fishing at Mercer Reservoir since I was in high school, and I'm telling you this story because, I don't know, I need to write it down somewhere. The police have it all on record, but I don't think they believe half of what I'm saying. I'm not sure I'd believe me either. This happened a few months back. It was Tuesday morning in September. I set my alarm for 4:30 like I always do when I want to catch the sunrise bite. The lake's about 20 minutes from my apartment, and at that hour there's never any traffic. I remember pulling into the parking lot at 5:15, still dark enough that my headlights were on. That's when I saw him. There was a guy standing next to a white sedan, just standing there, middle of the parking lot, facing toward where I was pulling in. Not walking to his car, not unloading gear, just standing, watching my truck approach. The sedan's interior light was on, and I could see the driver's door was open behind him. I parked on the opposite side of the lot from him, closer to the dock, and I sat in my truck for a minute trying to decide if this was weird enough to leave. Because here's the thing, it was 5:15 in the morning at a fishing spot. There should be other people. But the way he was just standing there, not moving, not even pretending to do anything, it felt off. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of his car and license plate through my windshield. I don't know why I did that exactly. I just had this feeling I should document it. Then I texted my girlfriend. At the lake, one other person here, white sedan, plates or plate number, just in case. She was definitely still asleep and wouldn't see it for hours, but it made me feel better. The guy still hadn't moved. He was just watching me sit in my truck. So I figured, screw it, I drove all the way out here, and I had my tackle box and rod right there. If he was going to do something weird, he'd have done it already, right? I got out, locked my truck, and walked toward the dock without looking at him. "Early start," he called out. Not a question, just a statement. I gave him a wave without turning around and kept walking. My hands were shaking a little as I set up my rod. I kept glancing back at the parking lot, but he'd gotten in his car. The interior light was still on, and I could see him sitting there, not starting the engine, just sitting. I fished for maybe 20 minutes before I heard a car door close. I turned around and he was out of the sedan again, walking toward the shoreline. Not toward the dock where I was, but to a spot maybe 30 feet to my left. He wasn't carrying a fishing rod or any gear. He just walked up to the water's edge, stood there for a minute, then took out his phone and held it up. At first, I thought he was taking pictures of the sunrise, which was just starting to show some color, but his phone was angled wrong. He was pointing it at me. "Hey," I called out. "What are you doing?" He lowered the phone. "Just taking some photos. Beautiful morning." "Were you taking pictures of me?" "The lake," he said. "You're just in the frame." I reeled my line in. "Can you delete those?" "Public place," he said. And then he held up his phone again and very deliberately took another photo, this time clearly of me. First Amendment. That's when I decided I was done fishing. I packed up my rod and started walking back to my truck. He walked parallel to me along the shoreline, matching my pace, still holding his phone up. When I got to the parking lot, he angled toward my truck, got there at almost the same time I did. "You're leaving already?" he asked. "Sun's barely up." I didn't answer. I just unlocked my truck and put my gear in the back. That's when I saw the coffee cup on my tailgate. A disposable cup from a gas station, still half full, sitting right there like someone had set it down while they were looking at something. "Is this yours?" I asked, pointing at it. He glanced at it. "Nope. It wasn't here when I got here," I said. "Maybe it was, and you didn't notice," he said. He was standing between my truck and his sedan now, maybe 10 feet away, just watching me with this completely neutral expression. I grabbed the cup and threw it in the trash can by the parking lot entrance. When I came back, he'd moved closer to my truck. He was looking at my rear window, at the stickers I have there. One's from my gym, one's from a brewery, one's a national parks pass. "You hike?" he asked, pointing at the parks pass. "Sometimes," I said. I got in my truck and locked the doors. He walked up to my driver's side window. Not aggressive, just casual, like we were having a normal conversation. He held up his phone again and took another picture, this time of me through the window. I could see his screen. There were already at least a dozen photos open, of my truck, of the parking lot, of me at the water. I started the engine. He knocked on my window. Not pounding, just a polite tap. I didn't roll it down. "You come here often?" he asked, his voice muffled through the glass. I put the truck in reverse. He stepped back, still holding his phone, and took a video as I pulled out. I could see him in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the parking lot, filming until I turned onto the main road. I called 911 from the road. I told them there was a guy at Mercer Reservoir taking pictures of people, acting threatening. They said they'd send someone to check it out, and asked if I could come to the station to file a report. I said yes, but I wanted to go home first and drop off my gear. That was my first mistake. When I pulled into my apartment complex, the white sedan was already there, parked 3 spots down from my building entrance. Same car, same plates. He'd beaten me home. I didn't get out of my truck. I sat there with the engine running, staring at the sedan. I couldn't see if anyone was inside because of the window tint, but I knew he was in there. He had to be. There was no way he could have left after me and gotten to my apartment first, unless he already knew where I lived, which meant he'd followed me before, maybe more than once. I called 911 again. Told them the guy from the lake was at my apartment. They said they'd send a unit right away. "Stay in my vehicle, don't approach." I sat there for 12 minutes before the police showed up. When the officer got out and walked toward the sedan, it was empty. Door unlocked, keys on the driver's seat, completely empty. The officer ran the plates. Rental car, picked up 2 days ago from an agency 40 miles away. Rented with a credit card that turned out to be stolen. The rental agreement had a fake name, fake ID, fake everything. They checked my apartment, checked the building, checked the parking lot cameras. He wasn't there. But the camera showed him pulling in 7 minutes before I did. He'd been waiting. The police had me come down to the station, and I spent 3 hours going through everything. They pulled the parking lot footage from the lake, and that's when things got stranger. He'd arrived at Mercer at 4:47 a.m., 18 minutes before me. But he hadn't driven straight there. The timestamps showed he'd been circling the lot, leaving and coming back, like he was waiting for something. For someone. The officer asked me if I'd posted anything on social media about going fishing that morning. I hadn't. Did I tell anyone? Just my girlfriend. And I texted her after I arrived. Did I have any routine I posted about online? I thought about it. I have a fishing Instagram. And, yeah, I post for Mercer pretty regularly. Usually on Tuesday or Thursday mornings. They asked if they could look at my account. I showed them. 43 posts from Mercer Reservoir over the past 2 years, almost all of them on Tuesday or Thursday mornings, between 5:30 and 8 a.m. I tagged the location every single time. The detective, this older woman named Ramirez, asked me to scroll through my followers list. 230 people. I knew maybe half of them personally. The rest were just fishing enthusiasts, random people who followed fishing tags. She had me screenshot the full list. Then she asked me something I wasn't expecting. Have you noticed any strange accounts following you recently? Any new followers in the past month or two who didn't interact with your posts? I scrolled back through my recent followers. Most of them had commented or liked stuff, but there was one account. Username. Just a string of numbers. Profile picture was a generic sunset photo. They'd followed me 6 weeks ago. I clicked on their profile. 0 posts. Following 47 people. I checked some of the other accounts they followed. All of them were people who posted fishing content from locations within 50 miles of where I lived. This one, I said, showing her. She wrote down the username. Said they'd request records from Instagram, but it would take time, and the account was probably already deleted or would be soon. I went home with a police escort. They checked my apartment again, installed a temporary camera in the parking lot at my request, told me to vary my routine and not go to Mercer for a while. They said they'd increase patrols in the area. That was 3 weeks ago. The white sedan was found abandoned at a different reservoir 60 miles away, wiped completely clean. The Instagram account was deleted an hour after I left the police station. They never found the guy, but Detective Ramirez called me last week. They'd been cross-referencing missing persons cases with people who posted outdoor recreation content on social media. There was a hiker who disappeared from a trailhead 7 months ago, about 100 miles from here. She posted regularly on Instagram about her morning hikes. Always the same trails, always between 6 and 8 a.m. They found her car at the trailhead. Keys on the driver's seat, door unlocked. 2 months before she disappeared, she'd been approached by someone at the same trailhead who took photos of her without permission. She filed a report, described him as a white male, 30s or 40s, gray hoodie. He'd followed her on Instagram from an account with a username that was just a string of numbers. They never found her. They never found him. Ramirez had me come in to look at photos from trail cameras near where the hiker disappeared. Hundreds of images, time-stamped, taken over several months. I spent 2 hours going through them, and I saw him 3 different times in 3 different photos, always in the background, always watching someone. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. In one of those photos, dated 5 months ago, he's standing at the edge of a parking lot, and in the background of that photo, barely visible, is a white sedan, the same one from my apartment. Ramirez didn't say much after that, just asked me to call if I remembered anything else, or if I saw anything unusual. She gave me her direct number. I haven't been back to Mercer. I deleted my fishing Instagram completely. I don't post about where I'm going anymore. Don't keep to any routines. Don't go anywhere alone if I can help it. And sometimes, when I'm driving, I check my rearview mirror a little too often. looking for a white sedan that's probably been returned, repainted, or crushed into scrap metal by now. But I keep looking anyway. I never thought $1,500 could cost so much. But here we are. I took a house-sitting gig back in 2016 through a friend of a friend. 3 weeks in this massive house about 40 minutes from my apartment, while the owners were in Europe. It sounded perfect at the time. Easy money, free place to stay, just water some plants and feed an old cat named Bishop. The house was in one of those gated communities where every lawn looks identical and the houses are spread out enough that you can't really see your neighbors. 3 stories, more bathrooms than I could count. One of those wine cellars in the basement that rich people have. The couple, Linda and Robert, seemed nice when they showed me around. They pointed out the guest room on the 2nd floor where I'd be staying, showed me how the alarm system worked, left me a binder with emergency contacts and Bishop's feeding schedule. Side note, Bishop was 17 years old and mostly just slept on the couch. Easiest part of the whole job. They left on a Wednesday morning, and I moved in that afternoon with enough clothes for the 3 weeks. The first couple days were honestly kind of great. I worked from my laptop at their huge kitchen table, watched their massive TV, felt like I was living in a house I could never actually afford. I slept fine. Bishop and I had a routine going. On Friday, I took the recycling out to the bins in the garage and noticed an empty wine bottle that I definitely hadn't opened. My first thought was that Linda and Robert must have finished it before they left, and I just hadn't noticed it in the bin. On Wednesday. Made sense, right? People have a drink before a long flight. Sunday afternoon, I was dusting the living room like Linda had asked, and I noticed something weird about the family photos on the mantle. There were 5 frames, but 2 of them were empty. Just the frame and the backing, no photo inside. I could see the little metal tabs on the back had been bent, like someone had opened them recently. I stood there staring at them, trying to remember if they'd been empty when Linda showed me around. I thought there had been photos in all of them, but I couldn't swear to it. It bothered me enough that I checked the other photos around the house. In the hallway upstairs, there was a gallery wall with maybe a dozen frames. 3 of them had photos that looked like they'd been put back crooked, not quite centered in the frame. One photo of Linda and Robert at some beach had a corner that was folded over, like someone had taken it out and shoved it back in without being careful. I told myself maybe they'd taken some photos with them for the trip. Maybe they wanted pictures of family while they were away. That made sense. Monday night, I needed to grab some extra towels from the linen closet on the 2nd floor. The door was across from what Linda had called the spare room, which she told me I didn't need to worry about. When I came out of the closet with the towels, I noticed the spare room door was open about 6 inches. I was pretty sure it had been closed earlier. I pushed it open all the way. It wasn't really a spare room. It was clearly a bedroom someone had lived in, probably years ago. There was a full bed with a plain blue comforter, a desk, a dresser, bookshelves mostly empty except for some old paperbacks and baseball trophies. The kind of room parents keep exactly how it was after their kid moves out. What made me stop was the dresser. The top drawer was pulled out maybe 3 inches, and the closet door was wide open. I walked over and looked in the drawer. It was full of old t-shirts and jeans, like someone's teenage clothes they'd left behind. The closet had some boxes on the floor that looked like they'd been moved recently, dragged out and not pushed all the way back. There were drag marks in the carpet. I closed everything up and shut the door. I figured maybe Linda or Robert had gone through it before they left, looking for something. I didn't think about it much more that night. Wednesday night, I woke up around 2:30 because Bishop was meowing at my bedroom door, which he never did. I let him in and he just walked around the room acting weird, sniffing at things. I was about to go back to bed when I heard a car door close outside. I went to the window and looked out at the driveway. There was a dark sedan parked behind my car, and as I watched, the interior light went off, like someone had just gotten out. I couldn't see anyone walking around, but my car was definitely blocked in. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just watching. My heart was going, but I kept telling myself it was probably a neighbor who parked in the wrong driveway by mistake. Except the house numbers were pretty clear, and who parks in a stranger's driveway at 2:30 in the morning? The car was gone when I checked again. Around 4. I didn't sleep after that. Thursday I tried to act normal, but I kept walking through the house, checking things. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor, and Linda had told me I could go in there if I needed anything from their closet, like extra blankets. I hadn't had a reason to until Thursday afternoon, when I convinced myself I should just do a walkthrough of every room to make sure everything was okay. The master closet was huge, walk-in, with built-in shelves and drawers. On the top shelf there were storage boxes, the kind with lids that people use for seasonal clothes or old paperwork. 2 of them had been pulled down and were sitting on the floor of the closet. The lids were off. One had file folders inside, the other had what looked like old photo albums. I didn't touch them. I backed out of the closet and closed the door. My hands were actually shaking. I knew I hadn't pulled those boxes down. Linda and Robert had been gone for over a week, which meant someone else had been in that closet, going through their things. I should have called Linda right then. I should have called the police. But what was I going to say? Some boxes are on the floor. Photos are missing from frames. It felt crazy. And part of me still thought maybe I was missing something obvious. Friday morning, I went into that spare room again, the one with the old bedroom setup. I don't know why, I just had this feeling I needed to look at it again. This time, I actually opened the dresser drawers and looked through them. Old clothes, some CDs, random junk. In the bottom drawer, underneath some folded sweatshirts, I found a shoebox. Inside the shoebox were papers. Report cards from high school, some birthday cards, a few old photos of a kid who looked like a teenage version of Robert. And at the bottom, there was a piece of notebook paper with handwriting on it, a list. It said, photo albums, master closet, dad's desk, check drawers, garage boxes, summer stuff, mom's jewelry, where? The paper looked new. The handwriting was messy, like someone had written it quickly. I took a picture of the list with my phone and then put everything back exactly how I found it. Then I called Linda. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear voices in the background like she was at a restaurant. I told her I needed to ask her something. I told her about the photos, the boxes in the closet, the spare room, the car. I told her about the list. There was a long silence. Then she said, very quietly, "Oh no, Tyler." Tyler was their son, 32 years old. That was his room I'd been looking at. Linda's voice got faster, higher. "Did you call? Are you still in the house? You need to leave right now." I asked her what was going on. "We had a fight last year. Money stuff." She paused, and I heard her say something away from the phone. Maybe to Robert. He kept saying we owed him things. Family things. Photos from when he was a kid. Some of Robert's watches. I don't even know. He wanted them and we said no because we thought he'd just... Another pause. We couldn't trust him with them. He got really angry. I asked if he had a key. And before we changed the locks, yes, we never got it back. Her voice cracked a little. "Listen to me. Leave the house, right now. I'm calling the police, and my sister will get Bishop, but you need to get out." I packed in about 5 minutes, just grabbed everything and threw it in my bag. I was halfway to the stairs when I heard the front door open downstairs. I froze. The alarm didn't go off. Whoever it was knew the code. I heard footsteps in the front hall, slow and deliberate, like someone who was trying to be quiet but didn't know anyone was home. I stayed completely still at the top of the stairs, holding my bag, barely breathing. The footsteps went toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen. I heard a door open, maybe the basement. This was my chance. I went down the stairs as quietly as I could and straight to the front door. I didn't look toward the kitchen. I just got out, got to my car, and realized with a sinking feeling that I was blocked in again. The same dark sedan was in the driveway. I sat in my car with the doors locked, trying to figure out what to do. I could back over the lawn maybe, but that felt insane. I was about to call 911 when the front door opened and someone came out. It was a guy, early 30s, wearing jeans and a jacket. He looked startled when he saw my car, like he genuinely hadn't expected anyone to be there. We made eye contact through my windshield. He didn't look angry or threatening. He looked confused, maybe a little sad. He walked to the sedan, got in, and backed out of the driveway without saying anything. Just left. I sat there for another minute. Then I drove to a gas station and called the police from the parking lot. I told them everything. They went to the house and found the list I'd photographed, the disturbed boxes, all of it. They told me Tyler had left by the time they arrived, but they were issuing a warrant. Linda and Robert came back early from their trip. They paid me the full $1,500 plus extra for the trouble. Linda cried when she apologized. She kept saying we thought he'd moved on. We thought he was done with all this. and explaining that Tyler had been insisting he had a right to certain family items, things he said were promised to him, and they'd been trying to handle it without getting police involved. What I can't stop thinking about is the list. Mom's jewelry. Where? He'd been searching the whole house, methodical, going through every room while he thought no one was there. The photos he took from the frames were ones with him in them, from when he was younger. The police found them in his car later, along with some of Robert's old watches and a few other things. But what was he planning to do if he found everything on that list? And what would he have done if he'd known I was there the whole time? Sleeping upstairs while he was going through closets and drawers just down the hall. Linda texted me a few months ago, asking if I'd be willing to house sit again over Christmas. Different house. Her sister's place. More money. I told her I couldn't. I didn't tell her that I still have that photo of the list on my phone. And sometimes I look at it and try to understand what he was really searching for.